The Last Train from Paddington, a Miss Marple mystery. Hi there, welcome back to Haunting Vales. Tonight's mystery begins on the last train out of Paddington, a journey like any other, filled with tired passengers, dim carriage lights, and the quiet rhythm of wheels against the track. Nothing seemed unusual until someone saw something they were never meant to see. A brief glimpse through a passing window, a struggle in the dark, and then silence. By the time the train reached its final stop, there was no body, no witness willing to speak, and no proof that anything had happened at all. But Miss Marple knows better, because in her experience, the strangest crimes are often the ones that leave behind nothing but doubt. As she begins to untangle the scattered clues, Miss Marple realizes that whatever happened on that train was planned with care, and someone is counting on it never being discovered. Before we uncover what truly happened on the last train from Paddington, don't forget to subscribe for more haunting Miss Marple mysteries on Haunting Vales. Chapter 1. The last train leaves Paddington. The last train from Paddington Station left on a wet Thursday night, the sort of night where London seemed soaked through to its bones. Rain slid down the glass roof of the station in long, crooked streaks, and the lamps burned yellow through the mist, making everything look half real, like a dream one couldn't quite shake off. Porters hurried along the platform with bent backs and red hands, carrying cases, boxes, and the burdens of strangers. Somewhere a whistle blew, sharp as a blade. Miss Marple stood near the first-class carriage, her gloved hands resting lightly on her handbag, her eyes moving about in that harmless little way people often ignored. That was their mistake. People always thought old age softened the mind. Miss Marple knew better. Age sharpened it, trimmed away the nonsense. She was on her way to visit an old friend in the country. Nothing urgent, nothing exciting. At least that was the plan. But trouble has a habit of climbing aboard trains. The carriage was nearly full. Across from her sat Major Bellamy, broad-shouldered, stiff-necked, with a military moustache and the habit of glancing at his watch every 3 minutes. On the seat beside him rested a black leather case chained to his wrist. Strange thing, really. People chained money, jewels, never papers, unless the papers mattered more. Further down sat a young woman, perhaps 25, pale as candle wax, twisting her gloves in her lap until the leather creased. She kept looking out the window, then over her shoulder, then back again, nervous. Not the sort of nerves brought on by travel. No, this was fear, clean and sharp. Near the corridor door stood a tall man in a dark coat, hat low over his eyes, smoking, quiet, watching. Miss Marple noticed all of it. She always did. The train groaned, then moved, slow at first, then faster. Paddington slipped away behind them, swallowed by rain and darkness. Inside the carriage, the warm lamps hummed softly. A tea trolley rattled through. Cups clinked, newspapers rustled. Ordinary sounds, comforting sounds. But the young woman refused tea. Her hand shook too much to hold the cup. Miss Marple leaned forward kindly. "Are you quite all right, dear?" The girl looked at her, startled, as if waking from bad sleep. Yes, thank you." But she wasn't. That much was plain. A little later, the girl rose suddenly and stepped into the corridor. Quick, too quick. Miss Marple watched her go, and 5 minutes later she heard it. A muffled cry. Then a heavy sound, like something or someone striking wood. Miss Marple's knitting stopped mid-stitch. The train thundered on into the dark. The corridor was empty. The young woman was gone. At first, people thought she'd moved to another carriage, but her handbag remained, her gloves, her ticket, everything, gone, except the things one would take. Major Bellamy stood. "Good Lord," he muttered. The guard searched the train from front to back. Nothing. Every compartment, every lavatory, every corner. No sign. The inspector at the next station was called, and the train stood hissing in the cold while questions began. Miss Marple sat quietly, staring at the abandoned handbag. Then she touched it. Still warm, very warm. She looked up. The girl hadn't disappeared long ago. It had happened minutes before, on a moving train, locked in with strangers. Miss Marple's eyes moved slowly across the faces in the carriage. One of them knew. One of them had taken her, and the train had many miles yet to run. Chapter 2. A Body Without a Name. The train pulled away from the little country station with a hard jolt, and the whole feeling inside the carriage changed at once. Only a short while ago it had been an ordinary night journey, full of sleepy travelers, rattling teacups, and the steady comfort of wheels rolling over iron tracks. But now there was an empty seat where the young woman had been sitting, and somehow that empty space felt heavier than any person in the room. Nobody said much. Fear has a way of making people quiet. It settles in the air, thick and unpleasant, and suddenly every stranger looks suspicious. The inspector had boarded at the last stop, bringing with him cold rain on his coat and the smell of stale tobacco. He moved through the carriage with sharp eyes and a notebook in hand, asking questions one by one, writing down every answer. Major Bellamy sat stiff as stone, clearly annoyed by the delay, though Miss Marple could see there was more than annoyance in his face. His hands were too tense, his eyes too restless. Across from him, Mr. Cray, the tall man in the dark coat, answered smoothly and calmly, so calmly it felt almost unnatural. Some people panic when trouble comes, others grow quiet. But a man too calm in a storm could be just as dangerous. Miss Marple stayed in her seat, her knitting resting untouched in her lap, listening carefully. That was her way. People often thought truth came from grand speeches or confessions, but it didn't. Truth lived in small cracks, a shaky voice, a quick glance, a pause too long. The inspector turned his attention to the missing girl's handbag, still sitting neatly on the seat where she had left it. That alone was wrong. A frightened girl might run, but she wouldn't leave behind her bag unless she hadn't meant to leave at all. He opened it and laid out its contents one by one. A handkerchief, a compact mirror, a railway ticket from Paddington station, a few loose coins, ordinary little things, nothing important, or so it seemed. Then he found the folded note. It had been tucked deep inside the lining, hidden carefully, almost as if the girl had wanted it found only if something went wrong. The inspector unfolded it and read it silently at first, and Miss Marple saw the change in his face before he even spoke. "What is it?" Major Bellamy asked. The inspector looked up and read the words aloud. "If anything happens to me, look in the blue room." That was all. No name, no place, no explanation, just those few words hanging there in the stale air like smoke. Miss Marple felt the weight of them at once. A person doesn't write such a note unless she expects danger. The girl had known someone was after her. Perhaps she'd been running all along. Before anyone could speak again, the door opened sharply, and the porter stumbled in, pale and breathing hard. "There's blood," he said. The carriage went still. The inspector followed him at once, with Miss Marple not far behind. The luggage compartment was cold and dark, full of trunks and cases tied down with straps, rocking softly with the movement of the train. And there, half hidden beneath a heavy rug, was blood on the wooden floor. Not a great deal, but enough to tell its own ugly story. Beside it lay a woman's shoe, small, black, neat, and expensive-looking. Miss Marple bent down to examine it. The heel was snapped clean off, not worn, broken, freshly. That meant struggle. The inspector touched the blood with his gloved finger and looked grim. Still wet, fresh. Whatever happened recently, while the train was moving, while everyone had been sitting only a few yards away, minding their own business, blind to it all. That was the thing about wickedness. It often worked in silence. Back in the carriage, the questioning grew sharper. The inspector asked who had spoken to the girl, who had seen her leave, who had moved from their seat. For a moment nobody answered. Then Mr. Cray spoke, cool as ever. "I saw her speaking to Major Bellamy before we left Paddington." Bellamy turned sharply, his face red. "That's nonsense." The answer came too quickly, too hard. Miss Marple noticed it at once. A truthful man often pauses, a liar jumps. The inspector's eyes moved to Bellamy's leather case, still chained to his wrist. "May I see it?" Bellamy hesitated. Only a second, but a second can tell you everything. He handed it over. The lock had been forced open, bent metal, fresh scratches. The inspector opened it. Empty. Bellamy went pale. "My papers," he said. "They're gone." "What papers?" the inspector asked. Bellamy swallowed hard and looked away. "Private papers." Miss Marple watched him carefully. Private papers didn't explain a chain around the wrist. Whatever was in that case mattered a great deal. The inspector pressed him, but Bellamy refused to say more. That silence said enough. And then, as everyone argued, Miss Marple saw something glinting beneath the empty seat where the girl had been sitting. She leaned down and picked it up carefully. A small silver key, plain, simple, but marked with grease, dark railway grease, not household oil, train oil. Miss Marple turned it in her fingers and felt the little cold weight of it. Keys belonged to locks, and locks hid secrets. She lifted her eyes toward the long corridor stretching through the train, quiet now, almost too quiet. Somewhere on that train there was a door this key opened, and behind that door the truth was waiting.
Chapter 3. The End of the Line. By morning, the train was cutting through the grey countryside toward Plymouth, and hardly anyone in the carriage had slept. The lamps had burned low through the night, and the air felt stale with worry. Faces looked older in the morning light. Major Bellamy sat stiff and silent, staring at the empty leather case chained to his wrist. Mr. Cray smoked one cigarette after another, calm as ever, though Miss Marple noticed his fingers tapping against the window frame. Even calm men crack somewhere, you just have to know where to look. Miss Marple had not slept at all. The little silver key sat in her gloved hand, turning over and over in her mind as much as in her fingers. A railway key, without question. It belonged to something on the train, something hidden. And hidden things, in Miss Marple's experience, were rarely innocent. At first light, she asked the inspector to come with her to the luggage carriage again. He looked doubtful. Chapter 3. The End of the Line. By morning, the train was cutting through the grey countryside toward Plymouth, and hardly anyone in the carriage had slept. The lamps had burned low through the night, and the air felt stale with worry. Faces looked older in the morning light. Major Bellamy sat stiff and silent, staring at the empty leather case chained to his wrist. Mr. Cray smoked one cigarette after another, calm as ever, though Miss Marple noticed his fingers tapping against the window frame. Even calm men crack somewhere, you just have to know where to look. Miss Marple had not slept at all. The little silver key sat in her gloved hand, turning over and over in her mind as much as in her fingers. A railway key, without question. It belonged to something on the train, something hidden. And hidden things, in Miss Marple's experience, were rarely innocent. At first light, she asked the inspector to come with her to the luggage carriage again. He looked doubtful, tired from a long night of questioning, but Miss Marple had that firm way about her when she was certain. Together they stepped into the cold compartment, the train rocking beneath their feet, trunks shifting gently with every bend in the rails. Miss Marple studied the walls, the floor, the racks. Then she saw it. A narrow metal door built into the wall near the far end, small enough to be ignored, painted the same dull color as the carriage itself. A hidden storage hatch. The lock matched the key. Without a word, Miss Marple slid the silver key inside and turned it. Click. The door opened. Inside, curled up in darkness, was the missing girl, alive. Shaken, pale, trembling so badly she could hardly stand. The inspector helped her out at once, wrapping her in a coat, while Miss Marple knelt beside her, speaking softly until the girl could catch her breath. At last, the truth came out. The girl had seen a murder before boarding at Paddington Station. A man carrying Major Bellamy's important papers had been attacked on the platform and the papers stolen. She had seen the thief's face and fled onto the train, thinking she could escape unnoticed. But the killer had followed, and when he realized she'd recognized him, he struck, locked her away, left her there to be found too late. The inspector stood up sharply. Who was it? The girl lifted her trembling hand and pointed toward the doorway. The guard. The very man who had searched every carriage, the very man everyone trusted. It was so simple once Miss Marple saw it. The railway grease on the key, the easy access to locked compartments, the freedom to move through the train without question. A guard belonged everywhere. That was what made him invisible. When the inspector confronted him, the man ran the moment the train pulled into Plymouth, straight down the platform, shoving past passengers, desperate now, his calm gone at last. But Major Bellamy, old soldier that he was, moved quicker than anyone expected. He brought the man down hard before he could reach the station gates. And just like that, it was over. The stolen papers were recovered, hidden beneath coal sacks in the rear carriage, important government documents, Bellamy finally admitted, worth enough to kill for. Later, as the morning cleared and the station emptied, Miss Marple sat with her tea, watching steam drift off the waiting engines. Funny thing about trains. You sit beside strangers, share the same journey, hear the same wheels turning beneath you, and never really know who they are, until something breaks, and then the truth comes rushing out like smoke through an open door. If you enjoyed this mystery, make sure to like, subscribe, and tell me in the comments, when did you suspect the guard? Because next time, the next quiet journey might hide something even darker.